Okay, so you asked a very interesting question. You asked about music, and I'm going to go through all of the guidelines that Jews follow for music, but you'll see that the laws do not translate as directly binding on Noahides. And I'll start off, maybe before I even get into the laws that are binding on Jews, I'll start off with two sort of overview points about Noahides and music. One of the concerns that God has about the music the Jews listen to is that listening to music could encourage inappropriate sexual behavior and violence. So because of that, there's a specific prohibition for a Jew on listening to music that would encourage thoughts that could lead to inappropriate behavior. When it comes to the laws for Noahides, there is no such prohibition, meaning that Noahide law was created by God to produce a civil society, to produce a good society, a society where people act appropriately towards each other and where they include God in their lives. That is all very concrete and practical. The prohibition on what we would call in Hebrew hirhurim, or thought, doesn't apply to Noahides. So let's say when we get to the concerns about sexual prohibition, there are very specific prohibitions for Noahides when it comes to sexual prohibition. 6 specific relationships are prohibited. You can't have relations with one's mother, the wife of one's father, a married woman, your mother's sister. Homosexuality, specifically between men, is problematic, and relations with an animal is problematic. Hirhurim, this idea of fantasy, something going on in one's head, which is actually binding on Jews, has no mention in the Noahide laws. So we don't want to say that, therefore, listen to whatever you want, regardless of what thoughts it may bring up, or watch whatever films you would like to watch, regardless of what thoughts it might bring up, as long as you don't act on it. Although technically, that is the red line. The red line is, will you act on it? We don't want to degrade ourselves, but the prohibition is on acting on these sorts of fantasies. And the same will be true when it comes to violence. If there would be music that would be violent music and would make one think about or fantasize about violence, that's not good for you, but it's not a halachic prohibition. It's not one of the Sheva mitzvahs, one of the 7 mitzvahs that Noahides are bound by, that the Gentile world is bound by. Okay, now, there is one other issue, which I want to say again as an overview before we actually get into the specific laws that are binding on Jews, and you could probably learn a lot of ethics and morals from those. But before we get there, there's something else happening with Jews, which is very unique when it comes to music. And that is that our temple was destroyed. And that was a place of intimacy between the Almighty and the Jewish nation. And we never recovered from that loss. Not having Hashem palpably present in our lives in an immediate fashion, like it was when we would go to the temple in Jerusalem and fire would come down from heaven and we would witness all these miracles there. That's a tremendous loss of closeness. And we understand that we lost that as a punishment, and that as soon as we're prepared, as soon as we refine ourselves and we stop hating each other and speaking badly about each other, etc., then the temple will come back, and we hope that will be soon. Until then, we're in a state of mourning, and part of mourning is one doesn't listen to music. So we're going to see that some of the prohibitions on Jews listening to music is because of the mourning for the temple. Okay, now, a Noahide is not required to mourn for the temple according to the letter of the law, and therefore the prohibitions on listening to music that are related to mourning won't apply to Noahides, because they don't have these laws of mourning for the destruction of the temple that Jews have. Having said that, there is a discussion amongst modern rabbinical authorities about the prophet Isaiah's statement. This is Isaiah 56:7, I think, that the temple was a base tefillah l'kol ha'amim. It was a house of prayer for all of the nations. And therefore, there is a tremendous loss to the Gentile world as well. That it's not a loss that motivated God to legislate laws of mourning. So there's no binding laws of mourning, and therefore there won't be a prohibition on listening to music for the Gentile world in the same way that there would be for the Jewish world, and I'll spell out exactly what that looks like for Jews. But it's something significant in the life of every Gentile that there isn't a temple today, and that is something that should be more. Okay, so maybe before I go forward now into the actual laws that are binding on Jews, and we can speak about how they might apply, at least in spirit, in a Noahide's life. Okay, I'm going to present a very wide spectrum of applications of the restrictions on music, and that spectrum will lead from the most extreme restriction, which would be that a Jew would only be able to listen to vocals, that is, without instruments, and they would have to be morally positive content. That would be the most extreme restriction today, and we'll talk about how we could get there. And then from there, you have all the way across the spectrum, all the way over to there are individuals for which Jewish law would say there are no restrictions on what kind of music they could listen to. And now I'll try to explain, like, what is the spectrum and what principles determine whether or not it's appropriate to listen to a specific type of music or not for a Jew, and then we can try to apply it for Gentiles. Okay. So Maimonides, in his magnum opus in the Mishnah Torah, in the section on the laws of fasting, this is in chapter 5, section 14, says that in the wake of the destruction of the temple, the rabbis decreed that Jews could not play musical instruments, and they couldn't play musical instruments in any way to make them happy, and it would be forbidden to listen to a musical performance that could make you happy. So both playing and listening are prohibited, and vocals, meaning just singing without any musical instruments, is prohibited, according to Maimonides, only when someone is drinking wine. And that's because of the words of the prophet Isaiah, who, describing the period after the destruction of the temple, said, Bashir lo yishte yain. This is Isaiah 24:9. He said, when you're listening to people singing, you shouldn't drink wine. And that was because it was too intense of a pleasure. It seemed like a disconnect from the reality that we lost our temple, we've been thrown out of the land, everything that's really important to the life of a Jew has been taken away. And therefore, it's inappropriate to be disconnected from it. And therefore, instrumental music is a problem, and even singing on one. Okay. Now, Rav Moshe Feinstein, who was one of the greatest rabbis of the previous generation, he wrote a halakhic responsum where he says that this passage in Maimonides is not binding on most Jews. It's too hard. They can't take it. The diaspora has been so psychologically trying for the Jews for 2,000 years that if you would take music away from them, they would crack. But he says that there are individuals who are on a high spiritual level. He calls them Balei Nefesh, masters of their soul. And he says that these people should be keeping this passage in Maimonides. And I know people who, as a result of this passage in Maimonides, do not listen to music any time when mourning is permitted. Okay, now, there are certain times when Jews are not permitted to mourn. So, for example, tomorrow night we're starting the holiday of Sukkot, and mourning will be forbidden for a week. So during that entire period, even somebody who was on a very, very high level and was listening to music and was not listening to music all year, during the next week, they would listen to instrumental music. They would sing, even with wine. In my home, we will be doing all of the above, even though it's not it's not common for me to be listening to music during the year, but at times when it's forbidden to mourn, then in my home we listen to music as well. Okay, so that's one end of the spectrum, Maimonides. Okay, so now let's switch all the way to the other end of the spectrum. There are people that it is inappropriate for them to take upon themselves any restricting, even filtering of their music. And those people basically fall into two categories. The first is that there's a halachic, a Talmudic prohibition on telling somebody a law that they're not going to keep. It does spiritual damage to somebody when they feel that they're rebelling against God. So the Talmud in Tractate Yevamot, that's page 65b, says, in the name of Rabbi Elazar, that was the son of Rabbi Shimon, that just as it's a mitzvah to say something that will be heard, so too it's a mitzvah not to say something that won't be heard. And therefore, if we're going to tell somebody a Jewish law, we would only tell them, or a Torah law, we will only tell them that law if they're going to listen. But if we know with certainty they're not going to listen, then we don't tell them. So here, there are people who they wouldn't listen to a law restricting music, and therefore we won't tell them that law. And therefore they don't have to filter anything. Okay, now second, there are individuals who would heed the advice to restrict the music they listen to. But if they actually gave up music, that could be really, really difficult for them. It could create tremendous stress. For many people, music is an antidepressant, and it could lead to psychological disintegration. It could lead to spiritual disintegration. The person might end up resenting their relationship with God. It could cause problems. And in this regard, my teacher, he was one of the great sages of Israel in the last generation, he said that you have to be very careful, because if somebody accepts upon himself a restriction which feels heavy, he said over a long period of time, he'll become increasingly rebellious. And at some point, it could create a major rebellion inside of him where he'll start throwing away other parts of his relationship with God. So therefore, a person either has to be very, very honest with themselves, or if they have a rabbi or a therapist, they should say, like, do you think that it would be a good idea for me to go down this path of restricting my music in any way? Because to take music out of somebody's life is a very, very serious move, and it could have implications. And we're always very careful, not wanting to destroy people. We only want to build people. Okay, so now we've got the two ends of the spectrum. Okay, now let's actually dive in and start to look at a little bit more detail. What is considered to be, if you'll pardon the term, kosher music versus non-kosher music? So first, let's speak about music without lyrics, just music. So there was a great sage during the Middle Ages. His name was Rabbi Yehuda Levi. He wrote a book which has been translated into English. You may have seen it, called The Kuzari. It's available in English, and it was a philosophical explanation of the principles of Judaism. Now, Rabbi Yehuda Levi was also a poet, and among his 300 or so poems that he wrote, there are a number of love songs, and some of those love songs are, at least for an Orthodox Jew, a little racy. There's one lyric that says, "Wondrous is this land to see, with perfume its meadows laden, but more fair than all to me is yon slender, gentle maiden." So he's talking about a young lady's body, and that's not something that most Orthodox Jews would speak about. It's shocking. But this was one of the greatest sages in Israel. So a whole discussion broke out between Rabbi Yehuda Levi and Maimonides as to whether or not these sorts of lyrics could possibly be appropriate. And Maimonides felt that love songs, especially love songs that would mention the body, were inappropriate. And Rambam Maimonides, divides all music up into 5 categories. He says there's music which is a mitzvah to sing and to listen to. There's music which is forbidden to sing or to listen to. There's music which is permitted to listen to, but he says it's disgusting. It's on a low level, this music. Then there's music which is permitted to listen to, and he says it's beloved. And then there's music which is permitted to listen to, and it's not disgusting, it's not beloved, it's just neutral. And in discussion of these different types of music, so he launches into a critique of Rabbi Yehuda Halevi and Rabbi Yehuda Halevi's lyrics. Okay, so the Rambam, who is the strict opinion here, Maimonides is the strict opinion. So he states very clearly that Hebrew songs, which are composed by a great Torah sage, are not necessarily morally superior to songs composed by the Gentiles of his generation, the Arabs of his generation. And he wasn't contrasting the value of Jewish songs written in Hebrew versus the value of Jewish songs written in Arabic. He's referring to Arabic songs, meaning Maimonides permitted songs composed by Arabs sung in Arabic. And he even said that some of those Arab songs could be superior to Hebrew songs written in some cases by great Torah sages like Rabbi Yehuda Halevi, who he was attacking. And therefore it comes out from Maimonides that the objective judgment of the kashrus, the permissibility of a song, has to be based on the song's moral content, not on its composer's religious or national identity. And other great sages, Rashi, the Maharsha, they take a very similar position in their commentaries. They say the exact same thing. So they all hold that what's really crucial is there something good or bad in the lyrics? Rav Moshe Feinstein, who I mentioned before, was asked whether it's permitted to listen to songs that are composed by Christians or by idol worshippers. And he said this. He said, if you recognize that the composer's intention was not to play for religious worship, but rather just to play for the pleasure of the music, then although the composer is a Christian or an idol worshiper, there is no prohibition on such music. In another place, where Moshe Feinstein was asked about the permissibility of music composed by a once Orthodox Jew who compromised his values, he became involved in inappropriate behavior, and he ended up being an immoral person. And he not only violated ritual law, but he violated ethical law as well. And Rav Moshe Feinstein responded, and he said, in the matter of a person who was a Ben Torah in good stature for several years, this person was a truly religious Jew and was a musician who composed holy songs and songs for weddings, and whose songs many religious Jews were accustomed to sing at religious celebrations, but whose character is no longer good, for he gathers young men and women together and sings before them. He was actually like doing more than just singing before young men and women. He was involved in doing bad things with them. So he says, you're now asking if it's permitted to sing the songs that he first composed when he was an upright religious Jew. And Rav Moshe Feinstein said, in my humble opinion, I don't see any problem with the songs that he composed when he was a religious Jew. Furthermore, Rav Moshe Feinstein says, I have a fundamental doubt whether the prohibition of bequeathing celebrity to evil people applies to a case where the songs composed are kosher, containing nothing inappropriate. For it's logical that Maimonides only forbid bequeathing celebrity to an evil person by giving notoriety to his acts of holiness in cases like writing a Sefer Torah. However, since publicizing an association with a secular matter does not grant someone genuine stature, there's no prohibition, meaning you can be a fan of rock music and you're not in any way supporting that person's religion. You just like their music. And he says, just like we would support medical innovations or other technologies that are created by even evil people, and we would even refer to those innovations using the evil person's name. We have no problem doing that. So in the same way, there's no problem whatsoever being a fan of music, even by this person who was a religious Jew, left, did immoral things. You can even refer to the songs under his name and enjoy them as long as there is nothing inappropriate in the lyrics. Okay, fine. And then certainly, or maybe I'll get to that. I'll get to the whole question of where there's no lyrics whatsoever. We'll get there shortly. We saw just now Moshe Feinstein hinting, and there's another passage explicit in the Marsha that says that heretical lyrics would make a song unfit for Jewish ears. It would be prohibited for a Jew. It would not be prohibited for a Noahide. But this is the area where you want to start asking yourself, okay, I'm not, in order to keep the 7 laws, I could still listen to heretical music. That is, let's say, music that says there is no God. But do I want to? That's a question that you could ask yourself. We saw that there was a big disagreement between Maimonides and Rabbi Yehuda Levi over how explicit a love song would have to be to make it unfit for Jewish ears. I can tell you that the bottom line is, if it inspires inappropriate sexual or violent thoughts, it would be prohibited to a Jew. It would not be prohibited to you. It would be permitted to you. And then it's just a question of whether or not you want to listen to such a thing. But in terms of technically keeping the 7 mitzvahs, you would be permitted. Now, this leads to something that's very interesting. There's a passage in the Talmud, in Sanhedrin 101a, that says, one who reads a verse from the Song of Songs, and that's one of the parts of our Bible, the Song of Songs, and makes it into a musical composition. They turn that into a song. The person who does that brings evil to the world. For the Torah girds herself in sackcloth, stands before the Holy One, blessed be He, and declares, Master of the universe, your children have made me like a violin that is played by jesters. So one could interpret this as only referring to the Song of Songs, but Rashi says it actually means the exact opposite, that the Song of Songs was even intended to be sung. Yet the halakha prohibits singing its lyrics to any tune other than the traditional cantillation. And therefore, how much more so, it would be forbidden to borrow lyrics from any biblical passage and turn them into a song. And many halakhic authorities sided with this Talmudic passage and with Rashi's understanding of it, and were very, very critical of Jewish songs, meaning songs were written for entertainment based on passages from the Tanakh, passages from the Bible. I should clarify, the only concern was the original Hebrew passages. If someone is singing a passage from the Bible that's been translated into English or any other language, it's not considered to be a passage from the Bible anymore. It's now considered to be someone's interpretation. It lost the holiness of God's words, and it's now just an interpretation. And if someone wanted to turn that into a song, no one would object. But if someone wanted to sing actual verses from the Bible in the original Hebrew, there are sages who would oppose that. Okay. Now, just to defend, because there are very famous Orthodox Jewish composers who composed songs with verses from the Bible, they're depending on authorities like, there was one Jewish legal authority called the State Kelemen. He's very, very well known, very authoritative. And he says that the problem was only if the verses were sung in a joking fashion or just for entertainment. But if the verses were sung by the singer as a praise to God, then they were recorded. So the singer did nothing wrong because he was praising God at the time when he sang it. And when people play the music, their intention should be that they're listening to praises of God. If they would turn it into just meaningless dance music, that would be a problem. But as long as they're playing the Jewish songs with the explicit verses from Tanakh in Hebrew, and when they're listening to it, they're thinking of the praises of God, according to the Seif Hamed, that's beautiful. Rav Moshe Feinstein said, he said as follows, it's possible, I'm quoting him, it's possible that the prohibition of turning Torah into songs applies also to blessings, for they are also considered words of Torah, as it is explicitly taught in Tractate Shabbos, page 115. The blessings are classified as words of the oral Torah, and it is logical that even words of oral Torah are like the verses of the written Torah regarding this prohibition of they made me like a violin. And Feinstein concludes, a person of high spiritual refinement should be strict not to record blessings and verses, and once they have been recorded, he should not play the blessings or the verses for pleasure. But I want to note, Rav Moshe Feinstein is very, very careful when he says that this is the law of a person at a high spiritual level. He's telling you this is not binding on all Jews. Someone who's at a high spiritual level may elect to restrict themselves in this way and not listen to songs with explicit Hebrew verses from the Bible or the prayers. But it's not binding. It would just be a gift, so to speak, that a Jew could give God by restricting themselves in that way. And even Rav Moshe Feinstein says that if when you're listening to it, you're intending praise of God, which is what's meant by the verse, then that's not a problem as well. Okay, let's go a little forward. Okay, this is important. There is a genre of Jewish music which is called a nigun. A nigun is just a melody. Very often you'll hear Hasidim singing nigunim. They'll just sing a melody. The approach in the Jewish world was always, if when you're singing the melody you have good things in mind, then the melody has a holiness to it, and that's fine, and there's no problem with it whatsoever. And for that reason, it's very interesting. Many of these melodies were like the klezmer melodies were often borrowed from very popular Gentile melodies that were being played in that area where those Hasidim lived. And they borrowed it and they brought it into their Yom Kippur prayers or their Shabbos prayers or their Shabbos meals. They would hum these melodies or sing these melodies. There's a very famous Chabad nigun, which is sung at the conclusion of the Yom Kippur service. This march is remarkable for its joyous rhythmic character. And where is its origin? It was played in 1812 by the armies of Napoleon when they crossed the border near Prussia in their invasion of Russia. The Alter Rebbe, one of the early Lubavitcher Rebbes, had left his own native town of Liadi when the armies of the enemy were approaching. He asked that the march be sung for him, and after a moment's contemplation, this Lubavitcher Rebbe designated that march as a song of victory. And until today, it's considered to be a classic Chabad melody. And they all know that it was borrowed from Napoleon, and that's not a problem at all. It really all depends with melodies. It all depends on the intention. And again, going back to Noahides, when you're singing melodies, the only thing that really counts is what's your intention in that melody. If you're singing for God, beautiful. Okay. Let me just go a little further. Okay. So let's now apply this to quote unquote Gentile music. Again, there really isn't such a thing as Gentile music the way that Maimonides understands, because it really all depends on the lyrics. So certainly classical music, jazz, New Age would be perfectly acceptable for the most right-wing Orthodox Jew, how much more so for a Noahide, with the exception of the issue of mourning. And the issue of mourning would apply to the most right-wing Orthodox Jew most of the year, but not certain times of the year, like on the holidays or in the hours immediately before Shabbos, etc. There are certain lyrics that were written by Gentile songwriters that Maimonides would definitely classify as beloved because of the beautiful moral message of the song. I'm thinking you may remember that there was a singer, Cat Stevens, who wrote a song called Cats in the Cradle, which encourages parents to spend time with their children. And there's no inappropriate themes. There's no inappropriate language there. It's really just a reminder, don't be too busy to spend time with your kids. And that's a beautiful ethic that the Torah would support. So here is a song written by a non-Jew in English that, again, with the exception of the problem with mourning, Orthodox Jews could certainly listen to. There's a country band called Rascal Flatts that has a song called My Wish, which just offers a blessing of very wholesome spiritual and physical success to a departing friend. Or the country singer Keith Urban wrote Song for Dad, which reminds kids that parents might be wiser than they realized during their youth. And there are many, many touching songs with beautiful ethics and perspectives that contain no inappropriate language, no inappropriate themes, and they would be 100% permitted for an Orthodox Jew. How much more so, there would be no prohibition for a Noahide. I would encourage, I would say people should listen to this kind of music. It will inspire them and make them into better people. Okay, now, it can be challenging to find really, really beautiful music. I know that many of my students have made it a project to find music that's wholesome and beautiful and inspiring and brings them up to a high level. And by encouraging to look around in the non-Jewish world for such music, they've expanded their repertoire. They have lots of Jewish songs they can listen to. There's also lots of Gentile songs they can listen to with beautiful ethics.